Accessing restricted archive. Case file identified. February 9, 2004. Location, Woodsville, New Hampshire. If you were to drive down Route 112 in Haverhill, New Hampshire, on a cold winter evening, you would find yourself surrounded by nothing but dense trees and the oppressive silence of the White Mountains. It is a place where the darkness feels heavy, and the only light comes from the faint glow of distant farmhouse windows. On February 9, 2004, at approximately 7 o'clock and 27 minutes in the evening, a local resident named Faith Westman was sitting in her home when she heard a sharp, sickening thud from outside. When she looked out her window, she saw a car, a black 2001 Saturn sedan, wedged into a snowbank at a sharp corner known as the Weathered Barn Curve. This was the beginning of a mystery that would defy logic, baffle the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and haunt the state of New Hampshire for over 2 decades. This is the story of Maura Murray, and the 7 minutes that changed everything. Maura Murray was not the kind of person you would expect to simply walk into the woods and never come back. At 21 years old, she was a nursing student at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. She was a gifted long-distance runner, a former student at the United States Military Academy at West Point, and by all accounts, she was incredibly smart. But the days leading up to that Monday had been strange. On the Thursday before she vanished, Maura had been working her job as a security desk attendant on campus when she received a phone call that left her completely catatonic. Her supervisor found her staring into space, repeating the words, "My sister," over and over again. To this day, no one knows what was said on that call. Then came Monday. Maura sent an email to her professors and her boss, stating that there had been a death in her family and that she would be gone for 1 week. This, however, was a total lie. There was no death in the family. She packed her belongings into cardboard boxes, stripped the posters off her dorm room walls, and headed to an automated teller machine where she withdrew almost all of her money, about $280. She then stopped at a liquor store and bought a significant amount of alcohol, including Bailey's Irish Cream, Kahlua, and a box of Franzia red wine. She got into her car and began driving north. She didn't tell her boyfriend, Bill, who was stationed at an army base in Oklahoma. She didn't tell her father, Fred. She just drove. By 7 o'clock in the evening, Maura was navigating the treacherous, icy turns of Route 112. The temperature was dropping fast, well below freezing. As she rounded the corner near the Weathered Barn, she lost control. The Saturn spun out, jumped the curb, and slammed into a snowbank. A few minutes later, a school bus driver named Butch Atwood, who lived just down the road, was heading home when he saw the crashed vehicle. He pulled over his large yellow bus and opened the door. He saw a young woman standing by the car. She wasn't bleeding, but she looked shaken. Butch asked her if she wanted him to call the police. Maura's response was immediate and strange. She said, "No, please don't. I've already called AAA." Butch knew something she didn't. This specific stretch of road was a notorious dead zone. There was absolutely no cell phone reception for miles in any direction. There was no way she had called AAA. Butch, feeling uneasy, told her he was going to head home and call the authorities anyway. He drove the short distance to his house, parked the bus, and spoke to his wife. Because of the difficulty in getting a signal, it took a few minutes to get through to the sheriff's department. At exactly 7 o'clock and 46 minutes, the first police officer, Sergeant Cecil Smith, arrived at the scene. The time between Butch Atwood leaving Maura by her car and the police arriving was exactly 7 minutes. 7 minutes. When Sergeant Smith stepped out of his patrol car, he expected to find a young woman waiting for help. Instead, he found a ghost scene. The Saturn was locked. The interior light was off. The airbags had deployed, and there was a strange, copper-colored liquid splashed across the ceiling and the seats. It appeared to be the red wine Maura had purchased. But Maura herself was nowhere to be seen. Sergeant Smith looked at the snow. This is where the logic begins to break. There were 2 feet of fresh, powdery snow on the ground surrounding the car. If Maura had stepped out of the vehicle and run into the woods, there would be deep, obvious footprints leading away from the site. There were none. If she had walked down the road, she would have had to pass Butch Atwood's house in one direction or the Westman's house in the other. Both families were looking out their windows. No one saw her walk by. It was as if Maura Murray had been plucked off the pavement by a giant hand. The officer looked at the back of the car and noticed something truly bizarre. Tucked deep into the tailpipe of the Saturn was a white cotton rag. To this day, investigators have no logical explanation for why it was there. Some mechanics suggest it was an old trick to hide engine smoke, but why would a 21-year-old girl do that in the middle of a car crash? The next morning, the search began in earnest. Bloodhounds were brought to the scene. These were professional tracking dogs trained to find a human scent even in the freezing cold. The dogs were given a pair of Maura's gloves to sniff. They picked up her scent immediately. They followed it out of the car and down the road for about 100 yards. And then, abruptly, in the middle of the asphalt, the dogs stopped. They began circling, confused. The scent just ended. This led investigators to a chilling theory. If a scent trail ends in the middle of a road, it usually means the person stepped into a vehicle. Think about the timeline. Maura is seen at 7 o'clock and 39 minutes. The police arrive at 7 o'clock and 46 minutes. In that tiny window of 420 seconds, a car would have had to pull up. Maura would have had to agree to get inside with a complete stranger, and they would have had to drive away without being seen by the 3 different neighbors who were watching the road. As the days turned into weeks, the mystery deepened. Police searched her computer and found she had been looking up directions to the Berkshires and Burlington, Vermont. They found her dorm room was packed as if she never intended to come back. But then, another layer of high strangeness was added. Maura's boyfriend, Bill, reported receiving a voicemail 2 days after she disappeared. When he listened to it, all he could hear was the sound of heavy breathing and what sounded like a woman whimpering in pain. The call was traced to a calling card issued to the Red Cross, but the source was never found. For the next 15 years, Maura's father, Fred Murray, spent every weekend in the woods of New Hampshire. He walked thousands of miles. He knocked on every door. He followed every lead, no matter how insane it sounded. At one point, a local rumor began to circulate about a house not far from the crash site. The rumor was that a group of men had grabbed Maura that night, took her to a nearby basement, killed her, and buried her under the concrete floor. The police dismissed it for years. But eventually, the pressure became too much. A team of experts with ground-penetrating radar scanned the basement of that house. The radar showed a massive disturbance in the earth, something shaped exactly like a human body. The family held their breath. This was it. After nearly 2 decades, Maura was coming home. The police brought in jackhammers. They tore up the concrete. They dug deep into the dirt. And they found nothing. Not a bone. Not a piece of clothing. Just empty, undisturbed soil. The radar had lied. Logic had failed again. There are those who believe Maura wanted to disappear. They point to the packed dorm room and the fake death in the family. They believe she had a second car waiting for her and she ran away to Canada to start a new life. But think about that for a second. If you were a 21-year-old girl starting a new life, would you leave your car in a snowbank? Would you leave your bank account untouched for 22 years? Would you let your mother die of cancer without ever sending a single letter to say you were alive? The math doesn't add up. Then there is the darker theory. The 112 killer. Some believe that a local predator was driving that road at exactly 7 o'clock and 40 minutes. They saw a pretty girl alone in the dark. They offered a ride. She, fearing the police would arrest her for the wine in the car, stepped inside. And that was the end. But even that theory has a hole. How do you abduct a woman on a narrow road in front of 3 houses and drive away in under 7 minutes without anyone hearing a scream, a car door slamming, or tires screeching on the ice? Today, if you go to the weathered barn curve, you will see a blue ribbon tied to a tree. It is a memorial for Maura. We are now more than 20 years removed from that night. The technology has improved. We have deoxyribonucleic acid databases that can find a person from a single drop of blood. We have satellites that can track movement. And yet, Maura Murray remains the ultimate archive mystery. She exists in that 7-minute gap, a ghost trapped between the bus driver's headlights and the police officer's siren. It is a case that reminds us of a terrifying truth. That the world is much larger, and much darker than we like to admit. That sometimes, you can be standing on a road, seen by your neighbors, and in the blink of an eye, you can simply vanish. Maura Murray is still out there. Somewhere in the silence of the White Mountains, the answer is waiting. But until that day comes, the file remains open. Accessing restricted archive. Case status, unsolved. Ending transmission.